Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Al-Fatiha biniyati man waslafna salihin wa bi anna Allah yaftah alaina futuhal arifin wa yafaqihna fid din. Inna Allah yunawwiru qulubana wa qawalibana ma'at tuqa wal huda wal ghina wal maut ala din Islam wal iman bila mihnati wal imtihan bi haqqi sayyidi walidi Adnan wa li kulli niyatin salihah wa ila hadratin Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam bi sirril asrar al-Fatihah. A'udzu billahi minasy syaithanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Arrahmanirrahim. Maliki yaumiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Alhamdulillah. I just would like to begin by a story that was shared with me by one of my classmates in Cassis when he was manning the Cassis bookstore one day at I think our teachers, Professor Zaini, Professor Wan, was giving a lecture somewhere, and our friends had to man the bookshop or the bookstore. So this book, the Batu Bersurat of Terengganu, was on display. One of the participants to the lecture, maybe a government servant I suppose, came and approached my friend Husni and said, "What's that book about?" So my friend said, "Well, this is a book about the stone inscription of Terengganu. It is a very important artifact because it is perhaps the oldest known Jawi script in the Malay archipelago. Yeah, the script meaning on stone. Of course, before that you have the Leran inscriptions in Java and several other parts that have later been discovered. And after having elaborated and dealt at length with the significance of this stone, then that person simply said, "Oh, buku pasal batu." So all that person can capture was that it's a book about a rock. Yeah. Of course, that's how also you will find the introduction Prof. Zaini had said. This book, this inscription was discovered in around 1887. Yes, 1887 near Kuala in Terengganu. It was near a surau, and people used to be standing on it to take wudu. Lo and behold, one day somebody would turn it and saw there were some inscriptions there. So it had to be taken on a boat, presented before the king. For the greater part of the 20th century, it was on display in the Raffles Museum in Singapore. Then in 1967, after independence, after settling political matters, our government brought back the stone to be displayed in the National Museum in KL. So from 1967, it stayed in there in that museum until the Terengganu state petitioned for it to be returned. So and since I think 1991, it has now since then been in Terengganu, and it is one of the more memorable, I suppose, images now associated with the state of Terengganu. I think it's in one of the roundabouts. It's in keychains. You go to the museum. It's all the image is prominent. It's even found its way in the cover of, I think, the secondary 4 textbook. Yes, for the government schools. Yet its significance until today, I think, remains unknown. For many, it's still a book about the stone, isn't it? Of course, one of the reasons is that being, I think, Professor Asma, who wrote one of the articles in this book that Prof. Zaini edited, said that there's about 230 something words in the inscription from all the sites that can be deciphered. Of this, some, about 80%, I think, or many, a big portion of it is in Old Malay. Some in Sanskrit, and others are words of Arabic origin. The text is also written in proficient Jawi. You will not find diacritical marks. That means to say, for most of the time, you will not find the dots. So, meaning to say, supposing it is an edict that was displayed for the public, that shows that in reality our society has regressed since 700 years ago when the stone was put in check. You notice how, for example, if you go to the streets today and you find shops with Jawi inscription, that not only will it spoil you with diacritical marks, it adds you certain consonants, isn't it? Modern Jawi, compared to how it was here. So, so one was because of the difficulty of deciphering the content, deciphering the meaning of the words. And then you find certain coinages that is now not used, or is now not understood in terms of what it means. For example, words such as balacara, words such as dewata mulia raya. Yes. So words of this nature is understood perhaps by scholars, because it's lost the way it is being used in the present sense of the word in Malay. So meaning to say, the average Malay speaker wouldn't be able to tell you, supposing they were to take their tourist friends, let's go Terengganu Museum, I'm going to show you the the centerpiece. Yes. And then, I can't really read this. And then even if you were to read this, you cannot tell them what it means, isn't it? So what then has been the substitute of not being able to decipher the meaning of this very important artifact for our culture, our history, is mythologies and legends, isn't it? You substitute for it oral reports. You say you hear from such and such, this was the case that happened. In the end, this is how your notion of history becomes mere fiction rather than true facts. Since Prof. Al-Attas first set his eye on it, he said that he was, I think, in the museum, in the National Museum. Back then, Blagden and several other Orientalists had written on it. Orientalist scholarship had even further obscured the significance of the Batu Bersurat. One, because Blagden, upon reading the contents of the Batu Bersurat, said that the date cannot really be ascertained. Because when if you look at the inscription towards the end there, it said 702, ya, di sasana kala baginda Rasul telah lalu 702. So he's saying that at the end there could be multiple possibilities. He tried to multiply the possibilities even without due cause. So he's saying it could be 28, 21, and so on and so forth. In the end, he came to about the possibility of 21 dates. And why is that? Rather than just simply taking what was apparent to the eye, which is 702 Hijrah, he proposed these alternative dates, and he inclined towards what is latest. And why is that? Why does he prefer the latest possible date? Because for him, a civilization in the Malay world must be post-dated. Because they have several other grand theories that inform their understanding of the Islamization of the Malay archipelago. One was the theory of the race between Islam and Christianity. So they said that, of course, they cannot dispute the fact that there had been several Malay Arab Islamic settlements in the archipelago, but they said that this Islamization, the intensification period, began rather in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. This was due to a competition with Christianity. So in order to fit into that theory, you cannot predate. So therefore, you would opt for the latest possible date. That's one. The second was the prominence of India, meaning to say Indian civilization, the Hindu Buddhists, and their firm adherence to this notion that Islam amongst the Malays is a thin veneer, and what hides it, what is beneath that thin veneer, is this very strong coloration, strong essence of the Hindu-Buddhist metaphysical framework. That also prevents him from arriving at the proper year and proper date, because in the dating of the Batu Bersurat, it is said there that this stone was erected, Adi pertama ada Jumaat, meaning to say the first Friday of the month of Rajab, di tahun Saratan, or tahun Syaratan, yes. Dan di sasana kala telah lalu Nabi 702 tahun Hijrah. So this Saratan or Syaratan is an important decision to make. On the text, as Prof. Nakib Al-Attas was bound to argue, and Prof. Zaini shared this with us 2 weeks ago in the lecture in Istak, he said that you will notice that all the sin will have the tooth or the teeth in it. But the way the shin is written, because there's no diacritical marks throughout, is just this straight curved line. So that means to say that shin stands out from the rest of the word. So that's why Prof. Al-Attas, upon looking at it, said that this cannot be saratan, it has to be syaratan. Now what's the significance? It is a sin and a shin. It's constellations. Was the moon at the station of Aries? Syaratan means the two horns of Aries. Al-Nath and Al-Natih, yes? Was it at the two horns of Aries, meaning to say in terms of the station, or was it in Saratan, meaning to say Cancer? Was it at the constellation of Cancer? Why did they insist on Cancer though? Because Cancer is represented by the crab, isn't it? And Cancer, in terms of medicine, means the sickness. But for astronomy, the term Cancer can provide them that possibility of escaping into Hinduism, because in Hindu cycles there is this Cancer also, the crab. But by settling it to be syaratan, then you cannot allow for this Hindu Buddhist to be mixed with the Islamic understanding. So, but this is the thing about the human mind, yes? Our human mind is not a Lockean tabula rasa. Yes? John Locke proposed that the human mind is like a blank slate in which empirical facts that we come across somehow forces its indomitable will upon us, and we are shaped therefore by our environment. But the Muslims rather incline towards this notion that the mind is also possessing its internal principles of a priori or badihi rulings, meaning to say we have this logical apparatus, this principle of tamyiz that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in us in such a way that we cannot really entertain things which do not belong to a system. If the mind is consistently presented with a thing that does not belong to a system, it becomes meaningless. And that's what happened to our history for maybe 150 years also, as a whole. Yes, before Prof. Nakib Al-Attas proposed this general theory of the Islamization of the Malay archipelago, all these facts became transfigured and becomes no longer part of a coherent system. As a result, that we cannot interpret these many happenings in history, so we become lost of interest to it. That's how most of us experience history also, isn't it, in schools? That's why when it comes to Malay history, we do not enjoy it because there's no story. I had a conversation with one of my friends. He's a curator at one of the local museums. He told me the same is the case with some of our museums. There's no story. So when there's no story, you come to the museum and you come back not learning anything, isn't it? Because you cannot put it in a framework. So similarly, when Orientalist framework is used in order to decipher all these multiple facts without a general theory that can synthesize everything, our facts become meaningless facts. In fact, it becomes like what Voltaire called impedimenta, meaning to say it's like dead weight. You know, to soldiers, when they are carrying things in war, it becomes dead weight. It doesn't add anything to it. Might as well, you should lose it, isn't it? So therefore, that's why when you ask the typical and average Malaysian, do you remember any significant dates from our history? Chances are you'll get 1511, isn't it? 1511. I've experienced this everywhere. You know? What's the most significant date? I mean, name me one date in the history of the Malay archipelago. I've tried this many times and many places, many platforms. Everyone said 1511, isn't it? Why not 702 Hijrah or 1303 Hijrah? That's much more significant for us than the fall of Malacca in 1511 by the attack of the Portuguese. Now to come back to this Batu Bersurat. Why Prof. Al-Attas said that it has to be syaratan, and why it is impossible, inconceivable for the Muslims to have allowed the Hindu-Buddhist remnants of their previous worldview to temper into this edict, this Batu Bersurat. First he said, because when it comes to dates, when it comes to the calendar, it involves doctrine. you cannot pray. You cannot pray without knowing the times of prayer, and you cannot fast, and you cannot give out the zakat without knowing the year, isn't it? And in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already revealed that indeed, in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the months are 12. Because before the revelation, before the advent of revelation, the surrounding people of Arabia, be it Arabs or several other people around the Prophet Muhammad, they were bound to cheat in terms of the months. They were bound to cheat in terms of this, not only the months, the days of the year. They would also do sometimes, for example, shift the months of the haram, yes, the sacred months. We know that the Quran also establishes that the sacred months are 4, and the months are known. Yes, Rajab being one of them, Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, Muharram. These are the sacred months, the 4 months. Yes, but in the past, because during the sacred months, you cannot engage in murder. I mean, you cannot engage in warfare, and people's caravans are protected and they can travel. So the Meccan chieftains would shift these months for their own advantage. So the Quran establishes these things. But interestingly, as the Prophet Muhammad would confirm also during his Hajjatul Wida, these dates of the amount of the months in the year and the amount of the days in the year, the Prophet said, as quoting from the Quran, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has established the months in the year since the beginning of creation. Meaning to say, it is no wonder then that the Muslims really developed astronomy. The Muslims really left an indelible imprint, an indelible mark in astronomy. You find various references in the Quran. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself swearing by the stars, La uqsimu bimawaqi'in nujum. Indeed, I swear by the positions of the stars. Innahu laqasamun. Indeed, it is a swearing. Law ta'lamuna azim. Indeed, if you knew it, it is an immense. Yes, because really the positions of the stars are something well established. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that also the stars are in constellation. وَجَعَلْنَاهَا بُرُوجًا وَزَيَّنَّاهَا لِلنَّاظِرِينَ. And we made it beautiful for you to look. So the months of the year are established, the constellations are established, and the Arabs were also very efficient navigators. And their print or their mark upon astronomy is felt so much so that even when Ptolemy was introduced to the Latin-speaking world and later the European universities, it retained the Arabic al, isn't it, in the great book of Al-Majest. Why does it have the al there? To show that it comes from Arabic source before it reaches the Muslims, before it reaches the European world. And furthermore, there are many of the buruj, many of the stars, like for example, as Prophet Al-Attas was to demonstrate in one Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Yes, he was citing a line there, that even there, that in terms of the constellation of Aries, the star that was mentioned just now, one of the horns of the Hamal or the sheep, is called Al-Natah, even in early or middle and late English. So that Arabic provenance. So when you know this, yes, that also the way the Muslims, as we said just now, since it is part of doctrine, astronomy therefore came with them. And Prof. Zaini would increase and add to the circumstantial evidence around this by saying that in the 13th century already, the Muslims, having established stronger and greater links with China, stronger and greater links with India, and stronger and greater links with through trade, and therefore stopping at these various parts of the archipelago, Terengganu, meaning to say that part, and Tioman being their natural places to rest and to harbor, would also not unlikely possess the astrolabes. Yes, and the astrolabes was a very important tool, an instrument in order to determine the positions of the stars and the celestial objects. One other thing that the Quran pointed to, you see how amazing the Quran is. I mean, because usually we read the Quran via the sieve of fiqh, of legal and jurisprudence. So we only see jurisprudential verses, or we would read it through the prism of, shall we say, tawheed. So therefore we focus on the verses pertaining to the unity of God, or we look at akhlaq, or we look at the lives of the prophets. So we naturally will miss some of these verses that are of very important establishing principles for sciences. Like, for example, astronomy. We said just now about the amount of days in the year. There is also in the Quran about the moon being in stations. Wal qamara qaddarnahu manazil hatta aada kal urjunil qadim. Yes, and the moon, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala said, we have apportioned it in stations until it returns in terms of its shape like an old withered date. Meaning to say, shaped like a sickle. And these stations of the moon, naturally, since what is the background of the moon as the celestial object, the background are the constellations. So where the moon is, in which station, is an important establishing point for the science of astronomy. So when the edict of the Batu Bersurat was established to be the first Friday of the month of Rajab, when the moon was at the constellation of Sharatan, can it be any other date than the one that was proposed? It's impossible. It is a scientific fact. Yes? And what should lead us to amazement about what was arrived at by our ancestors 700 years ago, 7 centuries ago, is that this arrival, this triumph of a scientific achievement, one, when you compare it in world history, is about 150 years before Muhammad Al-Fatih conquered Istanbul. 150 years before that. It was about 2 centuries before the trial of Galileo. Yes? 2 centuries after the Batu Bersurat of Terengganu, with that very precise location in terms of the station of the moon in the constellation of Sharatan, established as a scientific fact, the Latin world was still arguing whether or not astronomy was a science or was it part of theology. People were still put on trial, yes, due to their observations being different from what was held as official doctrine of the church. There was this book by Nicolae Copernicus, yes. A famous biography of the book was titled "The Book That Nobody Ever Read." Yes, because the revolutionary boost, or the revolution of the heavenly spheres, which was proposed by Copernicus, was to be ground shaking in that he proposed a heliocentric picture of the universe compared to the previously held geocentric one, meaning to say the earth being at the center of the universe, that was officially held by the church for the longest times. So in the West, people still risk their lives, risk their freedoms with regards to scientific achievements and scientific proposals. But here we have, as part of an official promulgation, a scientific astronomical fact that is mentioned just at the end of the Batu Bersurat Terengganu. So what Prof. Al-Attas had done in 1970, when he published the correct date of the Batu Bersurat of Terengganu, if we understand and the significance, if we had understood, if our parents understood it, should in fact liberate ourselves. We should then understand that we shouldn't be led to believe what other people tell us about who we are. Yes, we shouldn't believe this, what they tell us about how, in reality the Malays, the people who brought Islam here, they were not really zealous preachers. They came on a part-time sort of thing. They were really here for trade. So if they had free time, they would then talk to us about religion also. Or they tell us many other things about how our religion had to pass through the sieve of Indianized, Hinduized Islam, Persianized Islam, and therefore this is second rate, and we are therefore at the backwaters of civilization. 702, no, it's impossible. Yes? The moon was at the station of Sharatan, and our people knew it. In about 2001, Prof. Zaini and my friend Ikhwan's father, both having training in astronomy, decided to establish and further strengthen the proof that was arrived at by Prof. Al-Attas using manual calculations. Of course, it was amazing. I mean, if you imagine how Prof. Al-Attas managed to ascertain that just using the human mind, isn't it? About the exact date. How did he calculate it 700 years before to arrive at that exact date? That's a brilliant achievement by the human mind. You know, exact. What Prof. Zaini and Uncle Azlan, what they have done was to do several things. One was to, by then they had the computer softwares that can tell you the sky projection hundreds of years ago. Yes, meaning to say you key in the proper position of where the moon might be and the location, and you can then arrive at the exact date of what was happening. So in these various softwares, including of course the data that they arrive at looking in Kuala Berang, when they keyed in the date, I think 1303, the exact date in Prof. Al-Attas' calculation, it turns out it was in fact the 4th of Rajab also. And where was the moon on the 4th of Rajab? It was at the constellation of Sharatan. 700 years ago, you know, like because of if you imagine this, you know, using computer calculations, software calculations, you arrived at 700 years ago, the moon was exactly where they said it was. Look at how connected we were in that sense. Yeah, so it's not just a book about a stone. Yes, it's about the scientific triumph and achievement of the Malay civilization 700 years ago. Whereas we're accustomed to believe that Islam only came here and only became consolidated in the past 100 or 200 years. And that too as a result of competition with the Western people who came here. And they were in fact who brought modernity to us. Yes, and we just, you know, gobble this up, whatever they tell us. And how many youth would have preferred to read world history and European history rather than to read about these things? Because they were presented rather in their school with the worst selections, isn't it? They choose the worst selections and not these very important ones. So that's one thing I suppose I thought I wanted to cover tonight, that important astronomical finding and the correct date by Prof. Al-Attas, its significance. Secondly, and I also mentioned about the significance of the general theory. Without a general theory of the Islamization of the Malay archipelago, you wouldn't be able to arrive at this fact. You need to understand, as Prof. Al-Attas, how he arrived at this general theory first. First, he was reading perhaps hundreds of manuscripts, yes, covering the expanse of the 15th to the 17th century. What he noticed, yes, remember he had been reading this manuscript since his teen years, yes, and then later he went to the big libraries in the University of London, in SOAS, in Leiden, yes, in order to enrich his understanding. What he had then discovered was that there was a gradual change in the Weltanschauung of the Malays, a semantic change in how we understood the world, how we understood ourselves. As a result of conversion, as a result of the utilization of the Malay language as a scientific language. Because the users of this language during those centuries were mutakallimun, meaning to say theologians or philosophers. They were Ahl Tasawwuf, were metaphysicians. They were jurists. So these people were men of science. So then, when they wrote using the language and when they tried to expound and explain using our terms underwent change. So Prof. Al-Attas, as a result of this panoramic view of the literature of say 2 or 3 centuries, was describing to us that there was a process of Islamization. And he divided this process of Islamization into 3 phases. The first phase was the theological legal phase. Before that, of course, was the conversion phase. This was not yet strong Islamization. In the beginning, Islam had a foothold perhaps in the coastal areas. Then gradually, this Batu Bersurat is very important because you know that by the 13th century, Islam already established itself as a kingdom from the Hikayat Samudra Pasai also. In the 13th century, we know that the Muslims' kingdom were already erected and established in Pasai, with the waning also, of course, of the Srivijayan kingdom. With this, with the Batu Bersurat, you know that Islam now became a political force also, a legal political force. So that marked the first phase, the legal political one. But Prof. Al-Attas was also saying, and Prof. Wan, developing on this and elaborating on this, was saying that the Batu Bersurat represented the last period of the first phase. Meaning to say, by now, the theological, political, and the legal aspects was already almost moving towards the second phase. The theological phase, in which you have an elaboration of the mental and intellectual aspects, when you can now start refining the ideas. In the Batu Bersurat, you have the word Allah, Rasul Allah. You have also the word Dewata Mulia Raya. This word Dewata Mulia Raya does not carry the Hindu connotation, because Dewata Mulia Raya is a coinage by them, because they had the word Tuhan there, but that word Tuhan was not used to refer to God, but the Sri Paduka Tuhan referred to the Raja Mandalika, meaning to say the local chief or local governor. So he was the Sri Paduka Tuhan, meaning to say he was the one that commanded the erection of that stone as an edict. But because the word Tuhan was used for the chief, in order to refer to this grand ontological God, they use this word Dewata Mulia Raya, meaning to say as a translation of the word Rabbul Alamin. Interestingly, the Malays had never translated the word Allah into Malay. The word Allah was always understood as a proper name, referring to Allah as a deity. His proper name, as he has ascribed himself. So in the early stage of Islamization in the Malay world, the Sanskrit Dewata Mulia Raya was proposed. In the early Javanese script, yes, in the I think in Sunan Bonang's work, the word used for God was Pangeran or Paneran, like that. Yes, gradually, as the word Tuhan became referred exclusively to God or Lord, the other words that were used to propose to because of their inherent connections with the other problematic aspects of theology became dropped. That's why you don't find in the later manuscripts any more reference to Dewata Mulia Raya. But you have now the word Tuhan. And this is as early as 1590. Yes, in the oldest known Malay manuscript, the Aqaid An-Nasafi, the word Rabbul Alamin, Allah, the Rabbul Alamin or Lord of the worlds is used now, Tuhan sekalian alam, and that would be remain until our times. But this word Dewata Mulia Raya referred to theology, meaning oneness of God. You have there in that script also to mark the consummation of the first phase of the Islamization of the Malay archipelago, a challenge to the initial mythological conception of the king. The king had divine rights before. And if you look at the previous Sanskritic, the Hindu-Buddhist understanding of the king, they were understood to be reincarnation of the gods, therefore above the law. But here, this Raja Mandalika, this Sri Paduka Tuhan, yes, this Sri Paduka Tuhan is a servant of the Dewata Mulia Raya. That's egalitarianism for you. Yes. So did the West introduce to us equality? No. Without any contact with the Portuguese, without any contact with Americans, this was not an alien concept that was introduced to us via democracy or via modern elections. There was already there. The king was a servant of the Lord. He's not the fa'alul lima yurid, as Raja Ali Haji was saying. He's not the one that does as he pleases. In fact, Prof. Wan was strongly arguing that even in this phase, yes, as penentu agama Tuhan, meaning to say, then he was saying that he was given this opportunity by God bagi mengukuh, atau rather bagi meneguhkan agama Tuhan, meaning to say to strengthen the religion of God, in the sense that he's already understood the meaning of the word Sultan, because the word Sultan, as it would be later developed in the Malay archipelago and in the understanding of the Aceh Sultanate, the Malaccan Sultanate meant Dhillullah fil alam, means God's shadow on earth. The shadow, of course, what reality does it possess other than just to follow the owner of the shadow? It is not the originator of the will. His will is God's will, but not vice versa. You cannot say that God's will is His will. Yes? Or rather, God's will is His will, but His will is not God's will unless it follows the Shara already in this Batu Bersurat. Of course, in practice, we don't know whether or not they followed these things. We would have needed more evidence, but in writing, this was the best interpretation that our scholars have given. And then you have the word benar bicara also there in the script. This word benar, meaning to say hak or truth, yes, already brought an epistemological aspect of the religion of Islam. Yes, so that means to say when Islam came to this part of the world, it challenged the dominant aesthetic conception of the world by introducing words such as this, benar, meaning the truth. So any action, yes, and the term bicara also, as Prof. Al-Attas was saying, this term bicara is not used for daily conversation. The term bicara is used in a court of law. And when you say a court of law, it is with evidence, proof. And in order to prosecute, in order to mete out judgments, you have to try with the evidence at hand. And then you have to establish the charge without any shadow of doubt. You see, it's the epistemological aspect, meaning to say the knowledge aspects already found there. So once it is promulgated here as the law of the land, yes, the Benua Terengganu, at that time, meaning to say a large expanse of area, that means already that Islam here, which is being strengthened by the king as a social religious phenomena, was already at the mature first phase, meaning to say in the external aspect. Prof. Al-Attas therefore was saying that the Islamization process that happened in the Malay archipelago during this period of say 700 years underwent first the Islamization of the body. Now, insofar as the Islamization of the body is concerned, the Batu Bersurat represented one of its most mature aspects, with epistemology found there, with, as we said just now, theology already found there, meaning to say that the scholars were already very careful in choosing which words to represent the reality of the religion of Islam. And then you have there also the Islamization process in its double movement. Islamization is not to be equated with Arabization. And the Batu Bersurat is proof of this. Because if Islamization meant Arabization, therefore you would find it all in Arabic. Even for theological terms, even for religious terms. For example, the term dharma there was meant to refer to the word zakat. And the term balacara there, yes, was meant to refer to the action of zina or adultery, which the common people might not have understood, but this term balacara was understood. So therefore, the Islamization process as a double movement meant two things. One, you insert some Arabic words by retaining its original meaning. But yet, you also infuse certain existing terms in the language with Islamic understandings. So that's the double movement of Islamization. And that's why Islamization does not entail necessarily Arabization. Even within the Quran, yes, Toshihiko Izutsu has proven in his study on God and God and man in the Quran, he's shown that, you know, first you have in the language there are several words in the Quran that are not originally Arabic. For example, names of prophets. Yes, some of them were not originally Arabic names, like Ibrahim, for example. Certain words such as Jahannam, such as Firdaus. Yes, these are words found in Old Persian. Yes. So that means to say from Persian words, but then the meaning there is understood in the Islamic sense of the word in the Quran. So the Islamization process, that the Quran was its first instance, already shows that it is a double movement. Why is that? Because already as a religion that was understood as a world event at that time, it already addressed itself to the entirety of humanity. It addressed itself to the Jews, to the Christians, to the Romans at that time, to the Persians at that time. So the Islamization process, therefore, as a model, when it comes to other parts of the world, follows this. And this also should give us some understanding of how we are to conduct Islamization today when we use, say, a European language. It is not necessary, supposing when we speak the English language, to use Arabic for everything. There are certain words, such as religion, for example, that can be infused with the Islamic word, Islamic meaning deen. Happiness could be infused with the Arabic meaning, Islamic meaning sa'ada, and so on and so forth. Even in the Malay language, isn't it? For existing words, with the exception, of course, for perhaps linguistic variants, you can include some Arabic, but for most of the time, you have some very important Malay understandings, or rather Malay words that is beautiful in terms of its meaning that can be understood Islamically. So that's the state of Islamization as it's reflected. All this in a stone inscription. Yes? So therefore, if you read it with the understanding of the general theory of the Islamization of the Malay archipelago, of course there are a number of factual propositions. In reality, every single thing that is conceived in this world, conceived through scientific lens, comes with a lot of general theory in the background, isn't it? Your notion of the world is a result of this very elaborate internal mental structure in your mind, isn't it? You had many years of schooling before you're accustomed to look at the world in cause and effect. Yes? Cause and effect is not a given in reality. Of course, your mind, out of habit, have seen that this occurs, then that occurs. This occurs, then that occurs. So therefore, out of habit, as part of the formulation, you see that you give this the name cause and effect. And several other things that you have been habituated as part of culture, as part of habits of seeing. That forms the part of your general theory. So similarly, when it comes to the histories of important parts of the world and your own history, you need this understanding of the way of the perspective, because human beings are perspectival beings, as Prof. Al-Parslan was saying, that you cannot avoid a perspective. But then why do you choose one perspective over the other? Why not fall into a moral relativism? Why not fall into a metaphysical relativism? Well, we say, supposing one perspective and one worldview is more conducive to happiness than another one, so that's why we adopt that. Is more conducive to truth than the other one, so that's why we adopt that. That's why conversion is not a simple experience. I think perhaps that should be sufficient, I suppose, for the first round. If you have any questions, I'll be very happy to elaborate and answer.